This is Alabama Politics with Steve Flowers, an in-depth interview with Alabama's top political newsmakers. Now, from the studios of Troy University, here is Steve Flowers.
I'm Steve Flowers, and welcome to Alabama Politics. Folks, we're very fortunate tonight to have as our guest one of my longtime friends. She's a young lady. She's been involved with Alabama victims of crime and leniency for a long time, Miss Darlene Hutchinson. She has succeeded longtime legendary vocal founder Miriam Sheehan. And I guess I've known Darlene since I was in the legislature, but she lives in Elmore-Watauga County, north of here, but she's been around Montgomery for, what, 35, 40 years?
Oh, not that long.
Not that long.
And then I left for a number of years.
Yeah.
I was in Texas for 10 years, so it's great to be back in Alabama.
It's good to have you on the show.
Yeah.
Darlene Hudson has been, I associate her with vocal.
That's where we first met. I was real active with vocal back then.
Tell us how you got involved. And let's talk about Miriam a little bit, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'd love to.
You know, she's recently retired, but tell our viewers about vocal and how it was founded, going back to even Quinette's story.
Right.
Because when I told Dr. Carl Stigall earlier today that you were going to be on the show, he immediately knew about Miriam's, because he was on the board of Birmingham Southern when her daughter Quinette was killed tragically.
Right.
And we talked about the location of where Birmingham Southern is located. And we're convinced that's probably one of the reasons why it's having some diminished problems now. But I didn't mean to get ahead of you, but tell our viewers, if you will, the founding of Vocal Victims of Crime and Leniency, what it does and that sort of thing, if you don't mind.
Yeah, it's actually, a lot of stuff was happening around the late 70s, early 80s, nationwide, but also here in Alabama. You speak of Miriam Sheehan. She is from Barber County, which is part of how you know her, but her daughter was a student at Birmingham Southern, Quinette, and was tragically abducted and murdered by 3 men, and it was 5 days before Christmas, 1976. And not only going through the emotional turmoil of an experience like that and loss of your child and tragic, I mean, just brutal murder it was, but then also the criminal justice system that you're suddenly thrown into. And they went through 7 trials. Many of them moved out of the area because of the publicity. And she started realizing all the inadequacies of the criminal justice system and the way it treated crime victims and how victims had no rights basically back in that day. And so her thoughts were that, you know, once I get these trials behind me, I'm going to change some of these laws. And she did. And she found a wonderful partner in Jimmy Evans. He was, of course, prosecutor in Montgomery at the time, and he was partnered up with her to help change a lot of those laws. And she brought the passion and the victim's perspective and founded an organization called Vocal, Victims of Crime and Leniency. There was about 8 or 9, I think, that were on that original charter, but Miriam, you know, has been the leader for a long time. I joined probably in 1989 and got to know her then. And
it had already been in existence about 12 years.
7 at that point. So, and
that's when you and I met.
Yes, shortly after that, about 89, 90, I graduated from Troy and moved to Montgomery. And I've been active with Vocal over the years. I was president of the Montgomery chapter in the 90s, moved away for a number of years, and came back here about 12 years ago and was president of the local chapter again. And currently I'm just a member of Vocal, but Miriam also has had a role, very significant role at the Crime Victims Compensation Commission, which is a state agency that helps victims with their expenses that are crime related.
She helped create that?
She did. That was one of the laws that she helped get passed.
What year was that?
1984. So you would have been in the legislature.
Yeah, and I passed the act to let the victims of crime be in the courtroom.
Yeah, that was a huge bill.
I handled that bill, and I never will wonder why Miriam picked me. I was a little freshman legislator, but she knew I was from her home county. I think that's the reason.
I would bet so. And that's been a wonderful bill, and you can't even imagine the people that has affected over the years, to give victims some kind of sense that they really belong as part of the case, because they often feel pushed aside. And a lot of states do not do that, not only for the victim to be in the courtroom, but in Alabama they get to sit at the prosecutor's table. And there are other states who just think we're joking when we say that we have that right. And so
we
she
passed that bill in my first.
Yeah,
my
it was
first-
it was the
That's
early
when
80s.
I met you. Was the first time in '80s.
Yeah, it was late 80s. We would have met, and then that bill passed.
I had passed that bill
yeah.
my first term.
Right.
When Wallace was governor.
Early 80s.
I've got a big picture on my wall. One picture of me and Miriam and Jimmy Evans and Governor Wallace, him signing that bill.
That's great. And a lot of those pictures, a lot of the bill signings are still hanging at the Vocal office on Court Street downtown. So it's
Am I
been
in
great.
there?
Oh, I would bet you are.
Yeah.
I don't know how you could escape
I
it.
know it. I was a lot younger looking. Had black hair.
And it's been great because things like crime victims compensation was another bill that was being passed.
That was passed in
early,
'84.
It was. And so that has been a state agency ever since then. And it was established, funded primarily through fines and fees from the court system. Even a moving traffic violation, you would pay $2 into that. And so it was more or less set up as a self-sustaining, self-sufficient agency. And because it was a pretty novel idea back then. Not many states were just experimenting with that concept of having the criminals pay for the criminal justice system and some of the harm that they were causing. And so Miriam served on the commission, the Crime Victims Compensation Commission, for 37 years and just has retired, and I filled her role in that capacity.
Well, how many people are on that commission?
There's 3. They're appointed by the governor.
The staggered terms all at one time?
Staggered. And so Jay Jones, the sheriff of Lee County, is one of our commissioners. I was appointed last year, so I'm almost at my year anniversary. And Holly Brown Owens, she is a professor at a community college and specializes in biology and sciences.
Now, this is not a full-time job.
No, not at all.
It's a part-time job.
We used to meet monthly, and the law changed where it's now at least quarterly, but we've been meeting more regularly because we've had a lot of business to take up. We've been digging through some of the facts and figures and realized that that model that was set up in the early 80s of the fines and fees is not sustainable any longer because they've been plummeting. Even though cases aren't really going down, the assessment of the fees seem to be declining. And we're still trying to put our finger on why that's been happening, but it's been over a 10 or 12 year period. So the legislature actually, we've gone to them, talked to them about the problem that because victims have been filing for reimbursements of their funeral expenses, their medical expenses, and having to wait 1 and 2 years to get a response, and that's not acceptable. We can't do that.
Tell me how much money is in that fund. How do y'all decide how much they get? Is it
The law sets up a pretty good criteria that you have to be an innocent victim of crime. You couldn't have participated in the crime. You didn't benefit from the crime in any way, and that you reported to law enforcement immediately. I think it's a 72-hour window. That you cooperated with law enforcement, and you have to cooperate obviously with our agency in submitting receipts because it is a reimbursement program.
Right.
And
what are they for their time to come to court? Or?
Well, a little bit of everything. We're the payer of last resort. So if you didn't have life insurance and you're paying for a funeral to bury your loved one,
you mean there's funds for that?
That's what we do. You help pass it.
That is fantastic, Darlene.
Well, and that's the fund that's been running so low.
Many times people don't have
exactly.
That's not fair for them to be
not.
murdered and somebody.
You're exactly
and
right.
Their family's got to pay for the
right.
And
so we get really active with helping pay for those funerals and medical expenses if you've been like shot or stabbed or beaten and didn't have medical insurance that covers it, or you have a lot of co-pays.
Let me ask you: do you have to be the actual victim to get compensated?
Well, the victim,
the family,
the victim or the next of kin in a homicide,
okay.
And then there's even there's some situations like in the Dadeville shootings that have recently occurred. Everyone that was there that's present is going to have some level of trauma. So depending, and I don't, there's a lot of criteria that you have to meet that, and I wouldn't want to put a blanket statement out there that if you meet this, this, and this, you would be paid. But if somebody's seeking counseling after the Dadeville shooting, for instance, that's something that we could consider.
You can do that?
And because you could be considered a crime victim for just being present
well,
there.
Yes, so, yeah. How much money's in the fund?
Well, it varies because we constantly have funds coming in from the court system. And then, like I said, the legislature, as you know, they're in the middle of passing their budgets. We are currently in there for $1.5 million for next, but we've never been in there before, so that's a huge victory.
In addition to what funds you get.
Exactly,
from the thing.
because the court fines have been diminishing so badly. And we just don't think it's acceptable for victims to have to wait that long to get their funding or to get their reimbursement. We've known victims that are being collections because they're living on a tight budget, and suddenly you're hit with the expenses of this crime. And it could be going to court, like you said. If we were working with a family not too long ago that there was a homicide that occurred in South Alabama, but the parents lived in one of the Carolinas, and they were having to come back and forth for the court proceedings. And so there's different ways we can help. Also, domestic violence, we do a lot in that regard. We amended the bill a number of years ago where even a domestic violence victim, to be able to escape the situation they're in, can seek some, and it's kind of complicated. I don't want to get into all of the if-ands, but the domestic violence victims can benefit from it, and we are the agency that pays for all the sexual assault forensic exams in the state. So about 1,000 of those that occur.
So they come out of y'all's fund for that?
Yeah, and that's a little peculiar. 1995, a law passed saying that a victim should never have to pay for the forensic exam because that's evidence collection. So a victim shouldn't be paying for that.
Right.
And up until 95, victims would get that bill. And so that
was... a victim would get a bill for a sexual assault?
To collect the evidence, yes.
Is that applicable in other states too?
Well, about the 90s, everybody started catching on to this is just not right. And so 95, we were all excited that we had that law on the books, but then no additional funding was ever given to our agency to compensate for that. So that's been cutting into the expenses or the funds we have available for homicide victims, for instance. So that's what we've been explaining to the legislature here
recently. Have y'all
recently.
gotten that out of your budget yet?
No, it's still in there. And we want to make sure that those are covered because it is an important service. And we've had some bills.
You mean a hospital, if some lady went in for a rape, assault, and the sheriff took her to the hospital.
Yes.
And they took a test, they gonna give her a bill for that?
Yes. It used to before in the 90s. 95 it changed here in Alabama.
Is that true of other states too? I guess it is.
I suspect they were all happening about that time. But like I said, in the 90s we just came to our senses and said that's wrong.
Well,
some state agency should pay for it, but like I said, the Crime Victims Compensation, our agency, was never given additional funding for that. And so that's something we're looking at and how we can make sure it's not affecting what we're able to do for other victims. But it's a great program, and it also, a lot of the statute that we operate under gives us a role to be victim advocates also. And because we really don't have any dedicated agency or individual in Alabama that stands in the gap for victims. I mean, we have a lot of participants in the criminal justice system who care about victims, clearly. But some states have a victim service agency. They call them different things, but so that's something we'd like to do more of if we could get out of the backlog that we have of the current claims we have.
Darlene, are the parameters on the amount of money you can give for like a funeral or certain things? Like, y'all have some guidelines within the law?
Exactly. The law does set some caps and for the entire claim, and
like
then
a funeral is like $5,000 or something.
It is. I want to think that the law says $7,000, but because of our the resources we've had and the dollars have been so diminished, we've had to lower some of those caps. So victims are still paying the full expense, but we're only able to reimburse them a portion. And that's something we really want to change, and that's what we've been talking to the legislature about. If they can help fund our agency, we will be able to do more for victims.
Do many legislators realize, do many law enforcement people, what I meant to say, realize this fund's there, don't they?
We do as much outreach as we can. I've even taught at police academies to tell about our program to make sure that they're aware of it. Victim service officers in the DA's offices is one of the one way that people hear about us a lot. But as you know, it takes a while for a case sometimes to get to a DA, and sometimes never goes to the DA if they don't have an arrest. And also some of the nonprofits that are out there, the rape crisis centers, the domestic violence groups like Vocal, they'll point victims to us also. So we're trying to do more outreach all the time to make sure victims know of this service, but then we want to make sure we're on solid footing too with our finances and our infrastructure, because we've seen some staff reductions too because of our the diminished resources we've had. So
you have a staff. There are 3 members
of the commission.
On the commission. Now, are y'all compensated for your time at all?
Just for when we meet. When we have official meetings, we get
So you don't have an annual salary?
No, we get $250, which I think works out to about $2,000 a year.
Oh my gosh! So now, but you also, your time is not limited to just that one meeting.
Well,
day.
especially, I've been at the legislature a lot this year.
I was fixing to say, yeah.
So trying to educate them and pull together some documents that illustrate the situation we're in.
And you do this on your own time and dime.
I have been, yeah.
And Miriam did it all those years on her time and dime, didn't she?
Yeah, she was a victim service officer for a little while at the, not a little while, for quite a while at the the DA's office, and then she went with Jimmy Evans to the Attorney General's office. And she's had a long affiliation with Vocal, of course, just recently sort of retiring. We still get to see her every now and then.
Is she retired in Barber County?
She's back and living in Barber County.
Back in Cloud.
Yeah, with her daughter, Sonia. So
Did she ever live up here while she was doing Vocal?
She did. She had a home in both places, and but she would make, Barber County's always been home to her. She loves Barber County.
That lady who is also over there, she's been there a long time.
Jeanette?
Yeah, Jeanette.
Yep, right. Jeanette's from Coffee County.
Now she's taken over. Now
she's the executive director.
Was her husband the one, was the sheriff?
No, her brother.
Okay.
That was her brother.
Yeah.
She's, I think, a fair amount younger than Neil Grantham. The highway's named for him, and between Coffee and Pike
Jeanette
counties.
Grantham, right.
Right. And she's been very effective and doing a lot of stuff for Vocal, and very feisty, and gets a lot of stuff done. And so
I came to the event that they had for Miriam.
Yes.
Sometime last year.
Probably the gala.
Yeah. And it was nice. And
and we've
Marshall came. He's doing a good job for Vocal.
Steve Marshall's been very supportive of Vocal. Yeah, we've been very fortunate to have some public officials that have
well, he was a DA, so he knew how important Vocal was.
Well, and just serving victims in general. I know he's done a lot with child advocacy centers over the years, and there's so many great programs out there that he's I know been working with over the years. And
Darlene, I've said this over the years, talking about Steve Marshall being Attorney General, and I could tell that he worked closely with Jeanette and Vocal and everything. Being a district attorney is really a good training ground for Attorney General.
I think so.
That's really what you are.
And actually, I got to know Steve initially. We would see each other quite often at the Sentencing Commission meetings. And you have to really, Sentencing Commission meetings are interesting. And if you're not into data, they're boring. But I'm into data, so I kind of liked him. But he was often the representative for the DA's Association and worked closely with the National DA's Association. And so we learned early on, even when he was the DA of Marshall County, that he cared a lot and actually got a lot of the public safety issues that are important to victims and to the community, and was a really good advocate in that role. And actually, one of the greatest honors I've ever had was when he was first appointed as Attorney General by Governor Bentley. He asked me to be one of the people that spoke on his behalf at his at his press conference that he had the following day. He had a legislator and a former sheriff. There was 5 of us, I think, that spoke because he was somewhat unknown to a lot of people. And so I was incredibly honored that he would ask me to
well, he's doing a good job as Attorney General, because I think primarily because he has grown up in prosecution.
Yeah, 16 years he worked as a prosecutor before he was Attorney General.
That's right.
And like I said, he was so much more involved too on policy issues statewide. We'd often see him at the legislature, and if there was some bill we were all working on, he was eager to be at the table working with us on that. So,
Darlene, back to the Compensation Commission you're on. There are parameters, like you have a certain limit you can give for a funeral or victims' hotel stays or something like that for the. Are you able to compensate people if they come to be in the court to visit for the trial?
Or even if they lose time from work doing that, or need child care to do that. And actually, part of how I know so much about the Compensation Commission and why it's so dear to me, I applied and received compensation in 1988. The year
It was in existence back then.
Well, 84 we were created, and then I was kidnapped at gunpoint while I was a student at Troy.
In 88.
In 87, and then I applied.
So it was
the following
already
year.
in play. In play.
So like the 4th or 5th year of its existence, I applied, and because I was unable to work for a couple of weeks, and I was putting myself through college, and I saw how vital it was. If I didn't get those few $100s.
How did you find out about it? Did the person that was working with you as a law enforcement tell you about it?
I suspect I probably, because I was a journalism major. That's a good question. I'm trying to recollect. I was a journalism major, and I was doing a paper in school on victims' rights, and for obvious reasons, I had been a victim.
Yeah.
And so in my research, I stumbled upon the Attorney General's Office for Victims Assistance, which was under...
was Evans still Attorney General?
Siegelman was back then. And that was, he was the one that established that office. And Nancy Kahn, I don't know if you remember Nancy Kahn.
I remember her, yeah.
She was working there, and so I learned about vocal through her, and someone probably at that point pointed me to crime victims compensation.
Siegelman did a good job for vocal, didn't he?
I don't know if I was still pretty new in vocal,
right,
but I mean, I know he established that office, which was a really big thing. And one of the really great, to close the loop on the crime victims compensation, every state has a program like that, but I had the opportunity to work for Department of Justice from 2017 to 2018, or 2019, or actually until 2021, now that I think of it, and I ran the office at DOJ that helps fund, because there is a federal grant that goes to all of those compensation programs. So I got to see how the other states operate and the training that's in place for some of the state personnel. And so it was to come back and now be back in Alabama and serve on the commission has really been very fulfilling, and kind of closes the loop on that.
You know, Darlene, if you had to script somebody to be on that commission, they would script you. I mean, if you had to say, okay, person who's had a personal experience,
it's very
going
ironic.
back to '88,
yeah, very
and
ironic.
all the years you've been a volunteer for vocal,
Right.
and even today, doing the lobbying stuff for the commission, free gratis.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's like you're really designed to do that job.
Well, I was very honored that the governor would appoint me to it. I knew that there was the position, Miriam had to resign early because of just unable to travel as often as she needed to. And I had some people suggest that I apply to it, and I'm just honored that the governor would select me.
Well, you're ideal for it. Now, do y'all meet here in Montgomery?
We do.
Every time?
Yep. Our office is over on east side of town, and so that's where the commission meets, and they're open public hearings.
And do you have a staff and everything?
We do. There were 32 about 5 or 6 years ago, and we're down to about 17 now because of the funding problems that we're having.
Well, can the staff, they can't make an executive decision, or can they?
The law changed last year where the executive director has more authority to do that, but the staff, a lot of them, they're working the claims, and they're talking to the victims one-on-one. They're gathering documents from law enforcement, because we want to make sure that we're using our resources wisely, and that we're, of course, doing what the law says, that, we're compensating innocent victims of crime. And you're supposed to file within a year unless you can prove, there's just cause, because sometimes somebody just doesn't know we exist, and they'll apply a year and a half later.
I bet 99% of people in the state don't know
Exactly.
exist.
Some of the senators that we've been talking to in the last few days.
I bet they had no idea.
You're exactly right. And that's where we've been on a mission to try to educate them more. Because we want people to know, and we want them to apply, and we want to be able to handle their claims efficiently, and not put them through more grief and stress by waiting to be compensated.
So some of the more mundane expenditures can be handled by the staff without y'all making an executive decision?
Well, they'll dig into the details of the claim, and like in the case of a homicide, you got to, if you're the next of kin, or are you the one that actually paid for the funeral, they've got to, of course, support all of that. And then it works its way through the managers look at it, and then it goes to the legal department, and the executive director can make a lot of those decisions. But then somebody can appeal a decision. And actually, I used to joke with Miriam, because they initially declined one part of my claim, but I did appeal mine, and they saw what the reason was, and I did end up getting the compensation back in 1988. And like I said, I know what a lifeline this funding can be, and I stayed in college because of it. and I have no idea where I would have ended up had.
Did you grow up in Florida or Alabama?
I grew up in Florida. I spent my first 18 years. I was
the Panhandle?
No, actually St. Pete, Tampa area. My father was from Coffee County.
That's right. That's why you picked Troy. That's right.
Yep, I have a lot of family from Coffee County, and so I've loved Alabama since I was little, and dreamed of going to college here.
Were they from the Elba Enterprise area?
Elba, more. And actually my great-great-grandfather settled between Troy and Elba. In
That's
Coffee
close where
County.
Big Jim Folsom grew up. Did you know that?
Well, my daddy used to talk about that. My father was born in 1918 in New Brockton.
Well,
so,
see, that's exactly where you're talking about.
Yeah,
Is where Big Jim Folsom grew up, between Elba and Troy.
Yep, Daddy was there for that 29 flood. He was.
Oh, that's a famous flood.
I guess he was 11, and then.
He remembers the 29 flood.
He did. He's passed on now, but.
Did he die in Coffee County?
No, he was living in Florida, but he sure did love Coffee County.
And so that's how you picked to go to school there.
Yes.
And he wasn't living there at the time, though.
No, he wasn't, but he sure was proud I was there. So, and he fell in love with everything about Troy, and Ralph Adams was the chancellor back then, and of course we loved Jack Hawkins. And one of my proudest moments, I have to just throw this in there, to be named Alumni of the Year of Troy University. And
what year was that?
2019, while I was working at DOJ.
Well, congratulations.
So that was, I love that university. So.
Well, that's a great honor to be named Alumnus of the Year. Darlene, this is just, I bet you it wouldn't be nearly 5% of people would know anything that Victims Crime Fund even exists.
I think you're exactly right. And actually, a lot of the victims' rights programs and services that we have in Alabama, a lot of people are not aware of. A lot of victims, they'll find out that they had some rights after the fact. And a lot of this is what we fight for quite often at the legislature, because laws are being passed down there all the time, and they'll overlook the victim aspect of it. And, unless you've got some of us down there looking at it and saying, whoa, wait a minute, the victim has some rights here. And because 1995, a lot of us got together and helped get the constitutional amendment passed for crime victims. So we do have that on the books. It doesn't have a lot of teeth to it. So someday maybe we'll add some teeth, but that's been on the books since 95.
Well, you're a superstar in the state of Alabama, and I really thank you for everything you do for Vocal and for victims into crime throughout the state and serving on this commission. And you're perfectly suited for it.
I don't know that I'll be able to do 37 years like Miriam did.
Folks, our guest tonight has been Miss Darlene Hutchinson, who is a Victims of Crime legend in the state. She's on the Victims of Crime Compensation Commission and a good friend of the state of Alabama and a good friend of the Troy University. We thank her for taking time out of her busy schedule to be with us. And we thank you viewers for watching and hope you tune in again next week for Alabama Politics. Thank you so much. Thank you, Darlene.
Thank you.